article that came out of the Federalist. And I like to read to you bedtime stories like this. According to the American, in fact, I'm going to change out glasses, my prescription reading glasses. I can actually, it's got like 3 different levels. Plain glass, because I got vision there, reading and computer. So, according to the American Declaration of Independence, people enter into political society for the sake of protecting their inalienable rights, which are otherwise insecure. The question then arises, what can the people do if the government betrays its trust and violates their rights? The Declaration's initial answer is, quote, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. End quote. The people create the government, but in doing so, they do not forfeit their right to vindicate their own rights, even against the very government they created. Thus, James Wilson asserted that the vital principle of America is that the supreme or sovereign power of society resides in the citizens at large, and that therefore they always retain the right of abolishing, altering, or amending their constitution. This right supersedes the claims of the government to the loyalty and obedience of its subjects. Federalist number 28 describes the right of revolution as, quote, that original right of self-defense, which is paramount to all positive forms of government. Let me restate Federalist number 28, the right of revolution as, quote, that original right of self-defense, which is paramount to all positive forms of government, not the negative form of government we have in Washington, D.C. for decade after decade. Moving on. This is, however, only the beginning of the story. The Declaration of Independence devotes more space to the right of revolution than to any other single concept. Equality and liberty are asserted, more or less without comment, but the right of revolution is explained in considerable detail, providing us with answers to a variety of critical questions about this vital principle. By what right can people supplant the authority of their own government? How can they justify the risks inherent in a course as drastic as revolution? What circumstances justify revolution? We get to revolution and the law of nature, one of my favorite laws on earth. Actually, my favorite law. In October 1774, responding to the passage of the Intolerable Acts by the British Parliament, and nearly 2 years before the Declaration of Independence, the First Continental Congress adopted a statement known as Declaration and Resolves. In it, the delegates asserted that the rights of the colonists derived from 3 sources: the immutable laws of nature, the principles of the English Constitution, and the several charters or compacts. In the Declaration of Independence, however, the English Constitution and the charters and compact of the colonies fall away, leaving only the immutable laws of nature, or as the 1776 document puts it, the laws of nature and of nature's God. The shift is significant as it illustrates the founders' core understanding of the foundations of the right of revolution. In 1774, the colonists were still attempting to work within the British system for redress of their grievances, and so they claimed the rights guaranteed to them as part of that system. They were seeking a political solution to a political dispute with Parliament. In 1776, however, the colonists became revolutionaries, claiming the right to establish themselves as an independent nation. In doing so, they cast aside British law and appealed exclusively to a higher law, the natural law. The natural law, as America's founding fathers understood it, is simply that portion of law of God that could be discerned through unassisted reason, without any reference to particular revelation. Alexander Hamilton noted that the natural law was an eternal and immutable law, which is indispensably obligatory upon all mankind prior to any institution whatever. The natural law is a standard of political right that transcends the constitutions and statutes of particular regimes. This means it can be used as a basis for evaluating the actions of governments and rulers, and any that violate the natural law are to that extent immoral and unjust. The natural law provides a higher law foundation for resistance to oppression, giving such resistance a moral validity that it could not possess otherwise. A right to revolution is unintelligible apart from the law of nature. Let me read that again. A right to revolution is unintelligible apart from the law of nature. One and the same, my point. Hamilton asserted that when the first principles of civil society are violated and the rights of the whole people are invaded, the common forms of municipal law are not to be regarded. Let me say that again. Hamilton asserted that when the first principles of society are violated and the rights of the whole people are invaded, the common forms of municipal law are not to be regarded. Men may betake themselves to the law of nature. The right of revolution is an appeal to the law of nature against the injustice of the existing government. The Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is a legacy of this understanding, as it enables the ordinary citizen to defend his own rights against anyone who would seek to violate them, whether common criminal, foreign invader, or the citizen's own government. Titled under Prudence and Revolution, the existence of a natural right of revolution does not, however, mean that the exercise of this right is justified in every circumstance. The Declaration's treatment of the right of revolution continues with the assertion that prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. I'll make a real quick point as to the direct reason why they set up government the way they did, with the House of Representatives serving 2-year terms, the Senate serving 6, one representative for roughly every 435 citizens in a given region, and 2 senators per state. And the reason it operates the way it does is the laws are supposed to originate in the House of Representatives, supposed to. Once those laws are passed, they go to the Senate. The Senate's a cooling body. They slow things down and they become a little more moderate in their speed, and they ponder and contemplate. And the reason is the House is a fractious, reactionary, temperamental lot. And when somebody has a whim, they want to exercise that whim without thinking things through for the long term. And if we didn't have the Senate to cool it off and put it backwards a little bit, then we'd be changing shit basically every other day. Anyways, moving on. Revolution can have the most catastrophic consequences. One need only look to the other 2 great modern revolutions to witness this. The French Revolution moved from its moderate opening phase to the repression and mass murder of the Jacobins, and ultimately traded the Bourbon monarchy for Napoleon's empire. The revolution unleashed more than 20 years of constant warfare on Europe, killing millions in the process. The Russian Revolution swiftly descended into Bolshevik tyranny and the unending terror of Stalin's regime. The explosive danger of revolution and the catastrophic effect of a revolution can have on ordinary lives thus require a high bar for the exercise of this right. The Declaration asserts that revolution is justified only when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. In these circumstances, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. This is where prudence comes into view as the supreme political virtue. Not every unjust act by a government justifies its violent overthrow. The Boston minister Simeon Howard warned his audience against blowing small injuries out of proportion. To such injuries, it is oftentimes a point of prudence, as well as duty, to submit rather than contend. A regime must prove itself systematically unwilling or unable to secure the rights of the people before revolution can be rightly undertaken. Even then, revolution may not be the appropriate response. The odds of success may be so doubtful, or the likelihood of increased human misery so great, that revolution should be avoided, even though the technical right exists. That's why we have to be pushed so far, people, before we blow the gasket. 2 years before Howard, John Tucker told his congregation, though it may not always be prudent and best to resist such power, and submission may be yielded, Yet that the people have a right to resist is undeniable. The ruler may be so powerful or his opponents so weak that an ill-conceived revolution may be doomed to failure and merely worsen the condition of the people. In such a case, the revolutionaries would be guilty of a great crime against whom they sought to liberate, because obviously there would be high catastrophic losses. Under the right circumstances, however, revolution is not only a right, but a duty. When the train of abuses is long and the people are clearly being crushed into servitude, and those who would resist have a reasonable chance of success, revolution becomes an obligation. In the aftermath of the battles at Lexington and Concord, the Second Continental Congress announced, in the language of duty, its intention to resist British oppression with armed force. Quote, honor, justice, and humanity forbid us tamely to surrender that freedom which we received from our gallant ancestors and which our innocent posterity have a right to receive from us. In America, in the mid-1770s, the right and the moment converged. Modern revolutions, unlike French and Russian revolutions, the American Revolution did not constitute an obvious cataclysm. It did not spiral out of control. It did not end in tyranny and terror, and it did not lead to a regime that was worse than the one it replaced. In these respects, the American Revolution was so different from its successors that some, like the conservative commentators Emmy Bradford and Russell Kirk, have argued that it wasn't really a revolution at all, but a kind of conservative secession meant to preserve the liberties of Englishmen, which were being trampled by the English government. Kirk even suggests that the American Revolution is misnamed, claiming it is a, quote, a revolution not made but prevented. A revolution for Kirk denotes a complete social upheaval, the kind France and Russia experienced in their revolutions, but America conspicuously did not. Nevertheless, America's founding fathers understood themselves as revolutionaries, and as they understood the term, they certainly were. In Federalist number 43, James Madison justifies even the peaceful supplanting of the Articles of Confederation with the Constitution in revolutionary terms, quote, by recurring to the absolute necessity of the case, to the great principle of self-preservation, to the transcendent law of nature and of nature's God, which declares that the